Pokemon Go has been going for over 8 years, and in this time it's seen many new features and systems added to the game. But what about all of the things that have been removed during this time? Well, in this video I will be going through 24 things that have been removed from Pokemon Go. First was a system that was removed very soon after the release of the game in 2016, and that is the original wild Pokemon tracking system. This system utilized footprint icons next to the Pokemon on the nearby menu, which gave an indication of how far away you were from a Pokemon. 3 footprints meant the Pokemon was within 1 kilometer of your location, 2 footprints told you it was within 100 meters, 1 footprint meant the Pokemon was within 10 meters of your location, and no footprints did mean that the Pokemon would appear around you within your encounter radius. And with the fact that there was no indication of which direction the Pokemon was, it did encourage you to walk around quite a bit in all directions, not just to the nearest Pokestop like the current system promotes. The footprint system was widely enjoyed by players at the time, but it was unfortunately removed within a month of the game's release. But why was it removed? Well, it was a little bit glitchy. For example, sometimes the footprints would get stuck at 3 footprints no matter how close you got to the Pokemon, and this was assumably part of the reason that Niantic decided to remove it. They did also release a statement addressing the removal of the tracking system shortly after they removed it. It basically said that they wanted to remove the tracking system to improve it, and they felt that it was confusing for players in its current state. They also said that the system in its current state didn't achieve the goals that they were trying to achieve with the game. Unfortunately, this system never returned to the game. The nearby system was instead shifted to be focused more around the Pokemon that were nearby Pokestops, and any Pokemon that it did show up that were nearby in the wild gave no indication of how close they are to you. But this wasn't the only feature available at the game's launch that was eventually removed. We also have the original gym system and the prestige mechanic. When the game released, gym control was one of the main focuses of the game because a lot of the features that we see in the game today, like raids, trading, battling, etc., weren't actually in the game yet. So the game was pretty much about completing the Pokédex and controlling gyms. And similar to the gym system of today, it was the only way for you to get free Pokecoins. But instead of 50 Pokecoins per day, you could actually get up to 100 Pokecoins per 21 hours. Depending on how many Pokemon you had in gyms at the time, you could claim Pokecoins every 21 hours. You'd get 10 Pokecoins per Pokemon in a gym, up to 100 coins each time you claimed. There was no limit to the amount of gyms that you could have Pokemon in, but you would be capped at receiving 100 Pokecoins, 10 per Pokemon in a gym. The current gym system can hold up to 6 Pokemon at a time, but the old system actually allowed each gym to have up to 10 Pokemon defending it, 1 per player that were ranked in order of CP, with the highest CP Pokemon being ranked the highest and being the last that you would fight. And unlike the gym system of today, these Pokemon could all be the same species. So you would often find gyms full of Pokemon like Dragonite, Blissey, Gyarados, Snorlax, etc. And that meant that some gyms could really take a while to take down, especially as the motivation mechanic hadn't quite been introduced yet, so the CP of the Pokemon in the gym wouldn't decrease over time like they do now, and beating the gym wouldn't lower their CP either. Instead, defeating a gym once would remove the bottom ranking Pokemon each time until you remove them all, and then you could take the gym for yourself. And when you took over a gym, it didn't start out with the 10 Pokemon slots available that your team could join. There was another mechanic that you had to do that allowed you to add more slots for your teammates, and that was the now removed system of prestiging. This system basically allowed you to battle and train against your own team's Pokemon in a gym, and doing this would allow you to add more Pokemon slots to the gym for other people on your team to add their Pokemon. So overall, defeating a gym and prestiging it could be quite a time-consuming process, but in a game that didn't have much else to do at the time, it was a lot of the gameplay. Next, we have a pair of Pokemon that were accidentally released into the game, and those were Black and White Kyurem. These fusion Pokemon were mistakenly added into Go Battle League win reward encounters in place of the regular Kyurem back in December 2023. So players ranked 20 or higher had around a 5% chance of encountering either of these Pokemon from win rewards when playing Go Battle League, and a few trainers actually managed to do so during the small window of time they were available. But what happened to these Black and White Kyurem that were caught by these trainers? Well, Niantic quickly resolved this issue by removing these Pokemon from any accounts that received them, and in place they were given a regular Kyurem with the same stats and appraisal as the Black and White Kyurem that they received. But what if they had already spent Stardust and Candy on these Pokemon to power them up? Well, luckily Niantic actually thought ahead about this, and the affected players were also given research that would reward them with 5 star pieces, 5 lucky eggs, 250,000 Stardust, and 250 Kyurem candy. Black and White Kyurem remain unreleased to this day, but they might not be too far off of a proper release. Judging by the way things generally go, with Primal Groudon and Kyogre releasing for the Hoenn Tour in 2023, and Origin Dialga and Palkia releasing for Sinnoh Tour in 2024, it is quite likely that these fusion Pokemon, Black and White Kyurem, will be released for the Unova Tour in 2025, especially as we now have had the first fusion Pokemon released into the game for Pokemon Go Fest 2024, so the fusion mechanic is already implemented into the game, so a couple more fusions will most likely be a simple addition to the game for Niantic. Next on the list we have a couple of characters that seem to have gone missing in action, and these characters are Team Rocket's Jessie and James, which do actually seem to have been silently removed from the game, or I guess they've just been forgotten about. They first debuted in Pokemon Go in 2020, and they would appear in Team Go Rocket balloons much the same as Grunts do, but the Jessie and James balloons would be a little bit rarer, and they would be the iconic Meowth balloon from the anime. But how would Jessie and James differ from the other members of Team Rocket? Well, Jessie and James were actually more similar to Grunts than Rocket leaders. You didn't need a rocket radar to find them, and they didn't use their shields in battle either, so they were relatively trivial encounters. And when encountered, you wouldn't fight them both at the same time. Instead, you would fight Jessie with her own unique Pokemon team, and then straight after you would battle James with his own unique team. And after defeating both of them, it would count as 2 grunts done for your research tasks and for your hero medal, and they would get you 2 mysterious components towards your rocket radar. Both of their first Pokemon used in battle were catchable and could be shiny. But with that said, when did Jessie and James disappear? So their last appearance was in October 2021 for the Secrets of the Jungle event, and since then there has been no sighting or mention of them in Pokemon Go. And as they are tied to the anime and are no longer part of the ongoing anime, it's hard to know if they will return to the game in the future, but it would be a shame if not, because they did add a little bit of variation to the rocket system. Nowadays, to activate a charged attack in gym battles, all you have to do is tap on the charged attack button when it has been sufficiently charged by your fast attacks. However, this wasn't always the case. The old gym system actually didn't have a charged attack button. Instead, there was a charge bar underneath the health bar of your Pokemon, and when one of those bars was filled up, you would then be able to use a charge attack. But there was no button to press to use the charge attack. Instead, you would long press on the screen to use the charge attack. This was, however, scrapped in favor of the charge attack button that we see today. Next on this list are the Pokemon encounter animations that had a very brief lifespan. These were unexpectedly added to the game in August 2021, and they were very similar, if not identical, to the animations Pokemon do when you play with them in AR mode. But instead, these animations occurred at the beginning of a Pokemon encounter and on the Pokédex screen. However, this was quickly removed only days after the addition, and Niantic never gave a reason why. Speculation from the community was that these animations were meant to have been added to the AR mode, instead of the encounter screen and the Pokédex screen, because in previous updates to this one, the AR animations had actually been removed. Although not confirmed, it does seem likely that this was an accidental implementation, but it was an interesting addition that added some unique flavor to each of the Pokemon that were encountered. Another feature that was released with the launch of Pokemon Go in 2016 were medals, and when compared with today, there were very few of them. But these medals only differed in appearance by the labeled text beneath them. Other than that, none of the medals had any uniqueness to them. Later on, these medals were revamped to have their own unique visuals, and the Platinum medal, which is an even higher medal tier, was added to the game as well. There have also been some specific medals released over the years that are no longer obtainable. For example, if you managed to reach level 40 by December 31st, 2020, you would receive the Legacy 40 medal. There have also been medals for events like Go Tour and Go Fest that were only obtainable at the time of these events. Next, we have possibly the most infamous change in the Pokemon Go history, and whilst not a complete removal, it did feel like it for many. And of course, I am talking about the remote raid nerf. Remote raids were added to the game back in 2020 during the pandemic to allow players to continue raiding from their homes whilst they couldn't go outside because of government restrictions. And throughout the course of the pandemic, remote raiding really allowed the growth of the global communities in Pokemon Go to flourish. But in March 2023, this would drastically change. Niantic announced that starting April 6th of 2023, that the prices of remote raid passes would be close to doubled, and the amount of remote raids that you could do per day would be limited to 5. Niantic stated that this was in an effort to try to revive in in-person communities and incentivize in-person play, with the restrictions of the pandemic reducing it around the world. This, however, did result in a lot of backlash from the community, with big questions over Niantic's stance on accessibility for players who can't go out and do in-person raids for various personal reasons. Another helpful addition to the game back in the pandemic were 1 Pokecoin bundles, which were first implemented in March 2020. Each week the bundle would contain items like remote raid passes, Pokeballs and Incense, for example, that allowed people to play the game from home. But in May 2020, these 1 Pokecoin bundles were removed despite the fact that a lot of places still had heavy restrictions due to the pandemic. Another very controversial removal from Pokemon Go was the removal of legendary Pokemon from research breakthrough awards. Completing a research task each day for 7 days gets you a research breakthrough, which will reward you with some items and a Pokemon encounter. It was first implemented in April 2018, where the rewarded Pokemon encounter was Moltres, and following this, the encounter would change every month, and up until the beginning of 2020, this encounter was almost always a legendary Pokemon, apart from maybe a couple of months here and there. The beginning of 2020, however, was a turning point. From then on, there would be no legendary encounters from these field research boxes, and instead in their place would be relatively common encounters like Woobat, Ferroseed, Scraggy, Larvitar, etc. Having a legendary encounter each week was very helpful for those that didn't have a local community to raid with, bearing in mind this was before remote raids were implemented. And also, as the Pokemon rewards from research are at level 15 compared to being at level 20 or 25 with a weather boost from raids, this means that you could often get legendary Pokemon that have a low enough CP to enter the Great League. During the pandemic, as well as the implementation of remote raids, there were other bonuses added to the game that were ultimately removed when pandemic restrictions were lifted in certain countries. And one of these was the increased effectiveness of Incense. Before the pandemic, Incense would last for 30 minutes only, and it would spawn 1 Pokemon every minute if you walked a certain distance in that time, and it would spawn 1 Pokemon every 5 minutes if you were stationary. But in response to the lockdown measures for the pandemic, these effects were altered. From March 13th, 2020, Incense duration would be doubled to 60 minutes. You would get 1 Pokemon encounter every minute even while stationary, and the shop price of Incense was reduced. However, on October 1st, 2020, the increased spawn rate while stationary was reverted to 1 in every 5 minutes again. But there was a problem. Many areas still had lockdown measures being applied here and there. So on November 19th, 2020, the 1 Pokemon per minute stationary effect was brought back. This effect would finally be removed from the game on March 1st, 2022 with the start of the season of Alola. But luckily we did keep the 1-hour incenses. Next up, we have another pandemic feature that was eventually removed. With players being unable to get out of the house for most of the pandemic, sending gifts to your friends was pretty much impossible unless you lived on or near Pokestops. In response to this, Niantic made it so that our buddy Pokemon would bring us a certain amount of gifts each day if we were close to running out of gifts. This was, however, removed alongside a few other pandemic-related bonuses. Another change implemented during the pandemic to allow for greater accessibility was the doubling of the time of community days. From April 2020 to March 2022, all community days were made to be 6 hours instead of the normal 3 hours. But once again, this was changed back to 3 hours from April 2022 onwards. This, however, has actually been iterated on by adding 4-star in-person raids that take place for 5 hours after the 3 hours of community day. And when you complete these raids, it will cause the featured Pokemon to appear around the host gym for 30 minutes, and these Pokemon would have the same community day boosted shiny rates. This basically allows additional time for some community day bonuses for those that can't make the 3 hours of community day. We've seen quite a few types of raids implemented to Pokemon Go over the years, including mega raids and shadow raids, for example. But one type of raid was completely removed. Well, kind of. This type of raid was invite only and not in the same way as remote raid invites. The EX raids were mostly the same as regular raids, but to get access to them, you would have to receive an in-game invitation, which would give you the gym name, location, and the time of raid that you could attend. You would then have to navigate to the gym at the time of the raid, and you would be able to access an exclusive raid battle. But how did players actually get these invites to these exclusive raids? Well, you would have to have recently completed a regular raid battle at an EX raid eligible gym, and then you would receive an EX raid invite in plenty of time before the raid, so you could try to organize people to do the raid with. These raids were first implemented in September 2017, and the boss was Mewtwo. But then on October 2018, Deoxys took over as the raid boss, and for the first time, trainers who received the EX raid invite would be able to invite their ultra and best friends to join them in the battle. Mewtwo, all forms of Deoxys, and Regigigas were the only only Pokemon that featured as EX raid bosses, before the EX raids were postponed in 2020 due to the pandemic. And many years later, in January 2024, it was found by data miners that the EX raid data had been completely removed from the game. But EX raids were seemingly succeeded by another type of raid, Elite Raids. These raids are similar to EX raids in that they were only available on the EX raid eligible gyms, and they are in person only. And whilst on the topic of Elite Raids, there was actually something that was removed from Elite Raids, and that was the wild legendary bird encounters that would appear after completing Elite Raids. One of the main features of the early Elite Raids, especially in the first few rounds of them, was that upon completion there would be rare wild Pokemon spawning around the host gym for a set period of time, much like we see in the Community Day 4-star in-person raids. Alongside other rare Pokemon, the legendary birds Moltres, Zapdos and Articuno were possible encounters from completing Elite Raids. They could be shiny as well, but unfortunately they were quite buggy. The bug basically caused some of the Elite Raid spawns to appear outside the radius of which they were supposed to spawn around the host gym. This meant that if you tapped on them when they were outside of the radius, they would suddenly disappear from the overworld map without even getting an encounter. This meant that whilst they were rare spawns, you also had to get very lucky to be able to encounter them. After many reports about this problem on social media, Niantic quickly decided to remove the possibility of wild encounters from Elite Raids. So for quite a few rounds of Elite Raids, there were no wild spawns at all after completion, and when eventually Niantic did decide to put this feature back in the game, the spawns were no longer as rare, and they didn't include the wild legendary birds Zapdos, Moltres and Articuno. There was actually another issue with a buggy Pokemon release that caused it to be removed from the game. Back in October 25th, 2022 was a Shuppet Spotlight Hour, and as a surprise, Niantic decided to add Zorua into the game for the first time for the last 5 minutes of the Spotlight Hour. However, this only occurred for some of the earliest time zones because some bugs were present that meant Zorua had to be quickly removed. There were actually a couple of issues. Firstly, Zorua, when it's working normally, is supposed to disguise itself as your buddy Pokemon on the overworld, and then when you catch it, it would transform from its disguised form into the regular Zorua form. However, the Zorua that spawned during the Shuppet Spotlight Hour would also take on the stats and the movesets of the buddy Pokemon, and it would keep them after you catch it, meaning that you could get some very high CP Zorua with moves that it doesn't normally learn. And even more wild was the other bug that caused any Zorua caught from Incense or Lure modules by auto catches to be a complete copy of your buddy Pokemon, and it wouldn't transform back into Zorua when caught. So after the Spotlight Hour's Zorua surprise was cancelled, Zorua ended up being reintroduced into the game 3 days later on the 28th of October, and it wasn't until November 15th of the same year that the buggy Zorua with incorrect stats and movesets and the buddy Pokemon caught that was supposed to be Zorua were all fixed and appeared as Zorua with correct stats and movesets. Remote trading has been a feature that has been requested by Pokemon Go players for a long time, and there were times in Pokemon Go where this feature was actually available. In 2020, there were a couple of times where trading distances were increased up to 40 kilometers, and whilst not the worldwide remote trading that a lot of people want, it still allowed for many more options when it came to trading with friends that you didn't live near. But since 2021, this feature hasn't returned to the game, and it's hard to say if it ever will. Quick catching has been part of Pokemon Go for years, and it really helps you save a lot of time by skipping the catching animation. There was, however, an even faster method of catching that was removed from the game. This was the AR quick catch. This worked the same as the regular quick catching method for the most part, but you would be playing in the regular AR mode to skip the first few seconds of an encounter before the UI appears. However, an AR update in 2024 removed the old AR system, so only the AR Plus mode was left over. And for Pokemon encounters, this AR Plus mode is very slow and it doesn't work in the same way. And whilst on the topic of AR, this isn't the only AR related feature that has been removed. In the early days of Pokemon Go, it was actually possible for trainers to do gym battles with the AR mode turned on. You could do this by going to a gym lobby screen where you select your battle party, and then there was a toggle in the top right corner. Toggling this on would begin the gym battle in augmented reality. This, however, was removed in 2017 and it never returned to the game again. And just to note, the AR shared buddy experience was also removed at the beginning of 2024. This was the mode that allowed you and a friend to have a Pokemon each in AR mode together, so you could take pictures of your Pokemon together. 2024 also saw an update to the in-game avatars, which introduced many new customization options, so trainers could have more freedom in how they wanted their avatar to appear. This included hairstyle options, eye color, body type, skin color, body shape, etc. However, many trainers actually didn't like the overall look of the new avatars, avatars, and criticised the fact that there was no option to return the new avatars to the way the old avatars look. Back in 2020, a number of countries including Australia, New Zealand, Germany and Taiwan got access to a now removed feature. This feature was a new way of obtaining Pokecoins that wasn't related to gyms. Effectively, trainers would receive some daily research tasks like catching a Pokemon, making an excellent throw, evolving a Pokemon, etc. And these tasks would reward you with Pokecoins. You could only receive 20 Pokecoins from tasks per day and 30 at most from gyms for a total cap of 50 Pokecoins, which is the same as we have now, but it was an interesting way to give players more freedom in the way they could obtain Pokecoins. However, after only 5 months of its implementation for testing in these specified countries, it was scrapped by Niantic and it's never returned to the game since. Next, we have the original 2-star and 4-star raid tiers. When raids were first implemented into Pokemon Go in June 2017, they consisted of tiers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, which progressively got more difficult from tier 1 up to 5. But in August 2020, when mega raids were added, in order to streamline the amount of raid tiers, tier 2 raids were combined with tier 1 raids and tier 4 raids were combined with tier 3 raids. However, tier 4 raids did later return to Pokemon Go for the post Community Day raids that would last 5 hours after Community Day. Also, tier 2 raids have actually made a return in a small way as well. They have seemingly been kept for special events like Go Fests, where there have been occasional tier 2 raids for Pokemon like Carbink in the past. Next was another feature removed from Pokemon Go at first due to the pandemic, and this was the walking requirements for Go Battle League. Before March 13th, 2020, to unlock your 5 sets for Go Battle League for the day, you would have to walk a certain distance. Alternatively, you could spend Pokecoins to access them instantly. This would cost 200 Pokecoins if there was at least 2 kilometers remaining, 100 Pokecoins if there was at least 1 kilometer remaining, and 50 coins if there was less than a kilometer remaining. From the launch of Go Battle League on January 28th, 2020 until January 31st, it would require a 5-kilometer walk for you to unlock a set of Go Battle League. From the 31st of Jan to the 13th of March, this was actually reduced to 3 kilometers per set. And then from the 13th of March, the walking distance and ability to spend Pokecoins on this was temporarily suspended due to the pandemic. It was then announced on April 5th, 2021 that this walking requirement would be permanently removed from the game to the relief of many Go Battle League players. And on the topic of Go Battle League, another removed feature was the guaranteed legendary Pokemon encounter that you would get from your first Pokemon win reward encounter after you reach rank 20. This feature was a great way for people to get encounters with legendary Pokemon that were currently in 5-star raids, especially if you weren't that interested in raiding and you just wanted to play Go Battle League. And whilst you can still get legendary encounters from win rewards past rank 20 even today, it is no longer guaranteed on the first encounter, and it is now a 4% chance like it is for the rest of the win reward encounters. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of these other videos on the screen now, and I'll catch you in the next one.